The year's 1347. Ships arrive in Sicily with dead crews still at the oars, when within months, entire cities fall silent. 60% of Europe will die. But this isn't a story about a plague. This is a story about who kept the trade routes open when they knew death was traveling with the cargo. This is about monarchs who erased debts by destroying entire communities. This is about families who bought Europe for pennies, while the bodies were still warm. The Black Death was the greatest crime in history, and nobody was ever held accountable. We call it the Black Death today. And once it started, the medieval world discovered it had no plan B. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. Someone profited from the chaos. While millions died, certain powers accumulated wealth and control like never before. This is invisible empires. And today, we're following the money trail through history's darkest plague. To understand why this was so devastating, you need to see the game board first. We imagine the Middle Ages as dark, slow, disconnected. But early 14th century Europe was booming. More population, more trade, more cities. Paris, Florence, Venice, London, packed with activity. And most importantly, the world was connected. A merchant could buy silk, spices, or metals that had crossed enormous routes. Across much of Eurasia, Mongol dominance had consolidated what historians call the Pax Mongolica, safe trade corridors that accelerated long-distance commerce. This network was an advantage, but also a trap, because the same system that moved wealth, ideas, and technology could also move something far worse. Yersinia pestis, a bacteria. For centuries, this bacteria lived in balance with wild animals, especially rodents in Central Asian regions. The problem appears when that balance breaks. Environmental changes, displacement, trade routes, more frequent contact between animals, fleas, and humans. Today, thanks to recent genetic studies, research with ancient DNA pointed to an early outbreak in 1338 to 1339 near Lake Issyk-Kul in present-day Kyrgyzstan as a key point for understanding the origin of the Great Wave that later devastated Europe. In simple terms, what medieval people saw as divine curse or poisoned air, we can now trace scientifically to the bones and teeth of those who died, nearly 700 years ago. But here's the first question nobody asked then. Who controlled those trade routes? Who profited from keeping them open even when death traveled with the caravans? What we know is that once the plague entered dense ports, it advanced with brutal speed. One of the first major entries to Western Europe was Sicily, in the city of Messina, late 1347. Contemporary accounts describe ships arriving with sick, or already dead, crews. Authorities trying to turn them away when it was already too late. Because the disease didn't need permission, it just needed to reach land. From there, the plague dispersed along maritime and commercial routes. It hit Genoa and Venice, moved up toward southern France, crossed to the Adriatic coast, and from the ports, it penetrated inland. In just months, the map started to stain, one city after another. And every medieval city had something in common. Density, narrow streets, wooden houses packed together, animals nearby, waste, water not always clean, crowded markets. These weren't dirty cities because people were stupid. They were cities with the technology and knowledge of their time. But that structure became fuel for a health crisis. Now here's what's interesting. The richest merchants, the church officials, the nobility, they had country estates. They could flee. They had resources to isolate, to stockpile food, to wait it out. The poor, trapped in the cities, exposed, expendable. The 14th century's best doctors had no microscopes, no antibiotics, no concept of bacteria. Their framework was different. ancient theories about bodily humors and the idea that air could become corrupted. In some places, they blamed astronomical alignments, vapors from the earthly brines, divine punishment, recommended measures like avoiding bathing too much for fear of opening pores. They burned aromatic herbs to purify air, tried to drain swellings, all without knowing if it helped. From their perspective, they were acting logically, but the plague didn't negotiate with the era's logic. And the general feeling was worse than pain: uncertainty. Because when your best knowledge doesn't work, society enters panic and searches for quick explanations, even wrong ones. The plague didn't just kill people, it killed the normal functioning of a city. When fear of contagion grows, the rules change. People stop visiting others. Work stops. Families lock themselves away in terror. Urban life, which depended on constant contact, disappears. Burials become urgent. Mass graves appear. And daily life reduces to a single task: survive the day. In the 14th century, the spiritual and physical were intertwined. For countless people, a crisis like this could only be one thing: direct divine punishment. And here a dangerous phenomenon emerges. When there's no clear scientific explanation, people look for someone to blame. Across various European regions, accusations circulated against Jewish communities, conspiracy theories about poisoning wells. We know today that was false, but in that moment, desperation was gasoline. But here's what they never tell you. While mobs attacked Jewish communities, who was seizing their property? Who was canceling their debts? Who profited from the chaos? European monarchs owed massive amounts to Jewish moneylenders. When those communities were destroyed, those debts disappeared. The Black Death didn't just show how fragile the human body was. It showed what panic can unleash within a society, and who benefits when society breaks down. If you're starting to see the pattern, how crisis always benefits the same players, then you need to subscribe to Invisible Empires right now. We're exposing the forces that profit from chaos while everyone else suffers. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you don't miss what we uncover next. Though we remember the plague for the cities, most of the population lived in rural areas, and the plague reached there too, through merchants, travelers, people fleeing cities hoping to save themselves, unknowingly carrying the problem with them. The rural impact was, in some cases, even more devastating long-term. Entire villages disappeared, fields unharvested, livestock uncared for, communities without generational replacement. What sustained the feudal system? Constant labor. Shattered. By the 1351, the first enormous wave begins to diminish, not because people won, but because the bacteria ran out of enough accessible victims in many areas. The exact death toll will never be known precisely, but a widely cited estimate is that around 25 million died in Europe between 1347 and 1351. What remained was a continent that looked similar on the outside, but was changed within. And then, the real power shift began. After the chaos, the economic system started moving. With so many people dead, something appeared that was previously extremely rare: labor shortage. For land to be worked, many lords had to offer better conditions. In some places, wages rose. In others, obligations were renegotiated. In others, feudal control weakened. Survivors had leverage for the first time in generations. But the elites didn't accept this quietly. In England, the Statute of Laborers tried to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. The powerful wanted to control the economics of death itself. When peasants demanded fair pay, they were met with laws designed to keep them poor. The message was clear: Even after losing half the population, you still don't deserve dignity. This tension would eventually explode into revolts, like the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Let's talk about how different powers responded to the economic collapse and who came out winning. The Holy Roman Empire watched its tax base evaporate overnight. Towns that once contributed thousands in revenue were reduced to hundreds. But here's the twist. Emperor Charles IV didn't waste the crisis. He used the chaos to consolidate power, seizing lands from weakened nobles and restructuring debts in his favor. The plague didn't destroy imperial power. It redistributed it upward. In France, King Philip VI faced a different nightmare. The plague hit right as France was bleeding money from the 100 Years' War against England. The solution? Debase the currency. Philip reduced the silver content in French coins, creating inflation that effectively transferred wealth from citizens' pockets straight into royal coffers. The people were dying, and their money was worth less. But the crown kept collecting. Venice and Genoa, the Italian trading republics, these were the real winners. Yes, they lost population, but they controlled the Mediterranean trade routes. When the plague cleared, they had less competition and more monopoly power than ever. Venetian merchants like the Polo family network expanded into markets left vacant by dead competitors. They bought up properties, ships, and trading licenses at fire sale prices. The Hanseatic League in Northern Europe saw opportunity in catastrophe. This network of merchant guilds controlled trade from the Baltic to the North Sea. When the plague decimated local producers, the Hansa stepped in. They controlled grain, timber, fish, and furs. They set prices. They decided who ate and who starved. Crisis gave them leverage they'd never had before. But here's where it gets darker. The papacy in Avignon was already one of the wealthiest institutions in Europe. During the plague, Pope Clement VI sold indulgences. Basically, pay the church and your sins are forgiven. Your soul is saved. Terrified families liquidated everything they had. Land deeds, jewelry, entire estates, handed over to the church in exchange for spiritual salvation. By the time the plague subsided, the Catholic Church had acquired so much property that it became the single largest landowner in Western Europe. Think about that. While millions died, the church became richer than kingdoms. The Black Death didn't invent changes, but it accelerated cracks that already existed. Culture changed too. Art became obsessed with death. The motif of the danse macabre emerged powerfully, where kings, popes, peasants, all walked toward the same end. A brutal reminder that, before the plague, rank guaranteed nothing. But let's talk about who actually came out ahead. The church, which positioned itself as the only salvation, saw land donations skyrocket as terrified families tried to buy their way into heaven. The church became one of the largest landowners in Europe. Let me give you a specific example. In Florence, the Bardi and Peruzzi banking families collapsed during the plague years, not just because of death, but because their biggest debtor, King Edward III of England, defaulted on massive loans to fund his wars. Those banks died. But guess who swooped in? The Medici family. Giovanni de' Medici established the Medici Bank in 1397, right in the post-plague economic restructuring. They bought properties for pennies, extended credit to desperate nobles, and positioned themselves as the new financial power. Within decades, the Medici weren't just bankers. They were kingmakers. They controlled popes. They became the shadow government of Florence. Here's another one. Jacob Fugger, born in 1459, built his family's fortune on the foundation laid during the post-plague economy. The Fugger banking dynasty became so powerful they financed entire wars, controlled the election of Holy Roman emperors, and at one point were richer than nations. The Black Death created the financial vacuum that families like the Fuggers filled. And then there's land consolidation. In England, aristocrats who survived the plague bought up abandoned estates at rock-bottom prices. The Percy family, the Earls of Northumberland, expanded their holdings massively during this period. Entire villages that lost 70 to 80% of their population were absorbed into larger estates. The small landowner class was wiped out. Wealth concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. This is the part they don't teach. The Black Death was the greatest upward wealth transfer in medieval history. The poor died. The middle class was devastated. And the elite, the ones with liquid capital, with diversified assets, with the ability to wait out the storm, they came back richer than ever. For centuries, the Black Death was treated as a distant medieval nightmare. But think about this. Empty streets, houses closed, fear of the air, rumors, invented culprits, isolation measures, cities trying to control entry and exit. Doesn't sound so ancient, does it? The Black Death was a test of civilization, and tests, when forgotten, tend to repeat themselves under another name. During COVID-19, we saw the same patterns. Billionaires getting richer while small businesses collapsed, governments expanding control, conspiracies targeting minorities, pharmaceutical companies making record profits. Let's be specific. Between 2020 and 2021, during the height of COVID-19, the world's billionaires increased their wealth by $5 trillion. Meanwhile, over 100 million people were pushed into extreme poverty. Jeff Bezos's net worth increased by $75 billion in a single year, while Amazon warehouse workers risked their lives for minimum wage. Just like the Medici buying up Florence after the Black Death, private equity firms bought up struggling businesses during COVID lockdowns. Blackstone, KKR, Apollo Global. They raised record funds and went on a shopping spree. Hotels, retail chains, healthcare facilities, all purchased at distressed prices. The parallels are exact. Debt cancellation then, debt cancellation now. In the 1300s, monarchs wiped out debts by destroying creditors. In 2020 and 2021, governments printed trillions, creating inflation that effectively reduced the real value of debt, but only for those who owed money. If you were a saver, your purchasing power got destroyed. Church indulgences then, big pharma today. In the 1300s, the church sold salvation. In 2020, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson made over $100 billion in profit from vaccines while countries fought over doses. The product was necessary, but the profit motive was unmistakable. Scapegoating then. Scapegoating now. In the 1300s, Jewish communities were blamed. In 2020, we saw attacks on Asian communities, conspiracy theories about bioweapons, political blame games between nations. Fear always looks for a target. The plague changes. The players stay the same. And here's the real lesson. Crisis doesn't create inequality. It reveals and accelerates it. The structures that allowed the elite to profit from the Black Death. Control of capital, control of land, control of information, control of narrative. Those same structures exist today. They're just wearing different clothes. I'm Marcus, and thanks for traveling with me through the past to understand what we have in front of us today. This is Invisible Empires, where we expose the forces that profit from chaos. The Black Death killed half of Europe, but the system that let some people get rich from that death, that system survived, it evolved, and it's still here. If this opened your eyes to how history's biggest crises always enrich the same hidden powers, you need to watch what I'm covering next. I'm exposing the hidden $7.9 trillion company you've never heard of, and it's still running today, controlling more than you can imagine. Click the video on your screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe to Invisible Empires and hit that notification bell, so you never miss when we pull back the curtain on the forces shaping our world. See you in the next era.